There wasn't much money when I was in college, and a date with Gladys often was a bottle of Dad's old-fashioned root beer and Fritos. Fritos were a little new at the time. I mean, that dates me, doesn't it? They just invented corn. Anyway, that was it. And before I met Gladys, the idea with the guys was to see if you could chug a whole bottle of root beer without breathing. So there's a way, and I will explain the technique to you in some other time. But but after I met Gladys, I mean, we stretched the bottle of root beer out a long time. I don't know. But while the way we're studying this part of Job is called Synopsis, and in a sense, Synopsis is like the foam on top. There's a little bit of the taste, and it's a little sweet, that foam, but it's not really satisfying. Sometimes it invites you to get to the rest of the stuff, to drink it, but just the foam. So Synopsis is something like that in a sense. It doesn't deal with the minutia. It's trying to give the bird's eye view, and the reason we do it in this particular section of Job is that we're trying to get an overall view that identifies these folk, these characters, these personages in the Jobine history for what they're worth. We saw the friends. We exited the synopsis of the friends and their speeches. They were arguments. Their arguments. And we decided they weren't friendly. That's real insight into the obvious. I want to congratulate you for making that observation. That they were not friendly. But we did get the overall impression. And we remembered that they came and saw and then promptly forgot what they saw to concentrate on what they heard. They forgot that Job was suffering. They forgot that he was scraping. They forgot, maybe they did not forget because they twisted the knife in him when they said, your kids died because of their sin. But they seemed to have forgotten that he was suffering from all of those things. A great composite suffering. And only reacted to what they heard. And so what was an original noble motive turned to something else. Now, granted that this approach loses some of the drama in a popular sense of that word drama. Because we're not doing Eliphaz and Job and Bildad and Job and Zophar Job and then repeating this. We're looking at the whole thing. But you can get the drama if you sit down and read that thing in about an hour and a half. And you can get that drama. But you will understand something about the people in this approach. Now remember the three main topics of Job in the lament. When Job complained in chapter 3, he had three topics. Why was I born? Why didn't I die at birth? And why do I continue to live now? Now that's a lament. That's worthy of the term lament. Complaint, lament, whatever. And the section of the great debate is probably less a debate, not even properly a discussion of points 1, points 2, and points 3. The friends only had point 1, and they kept bringing the change on point 1. And Job actually, not always, in fact, rarely did he actually answer the complaint of ex-friend. He responded to the event, and he responded to the tone of things, and only once in a while did he respond to the specific comment of the friend. Job had an agenda too. It was slightly different than the friends' agenda, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. And you must remember that all three of these friends, that the three friends and Job, all four people, graduated from the same school. Their diploma, each diploma showed that they had majored in one point of theology. They all belonged to the school that said, you're blessed, you receive blessing, and you are prosperous when you don't sin. And when there's sin, then you suffer. Everybody was in that. Job felt the same way. Job came through this whole rigmarole of comment with an adjustment of that philosophy and of that theology. But we'll see that as we go along. Remember, not one of the four knew what's in the prologue. They didn't know it. And so when the friends dealt with why you suffer, Job, it was speculation based on a thesis in their theology. But they speculated. They didn't know. But neither did Job know. Another observation. Job had enough problems to deal with long before the friends came. Huge problems. My family's gone. The wealth is gone. My health is affected. Now the friends come, and from the cloth of their theology, they cut out a whole new problem. And they lay it on him. So, Job is indeed a sufferer. Okay. There are 3 cycles. Hold your breath. I know that we have to come to the Lord's table later, and we need time for that. But there were 3 cycles. We may not get through all 3. 3 cycles of arguments, and we're going to look at Job in the first cycle, meaning that Job will have spoken 3 times in that first cycle. The cycle would be Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar. And Job is going to speak after Eliphaz, and he's going to speak after Bildad, and he's going to speak after Zophar. So that's the first cycle. So what is there in the first cycle? And what does it tell us about Job? His first speech, chapter 6 through 7. 6 and 7. And there are 4 things that stand out in that speech. Anger. In the first part of 6, anger. He defends his anger and his bitterness, and for all practical purposes says to them, look at me. Look at me. And I think in a sense he's saying that because all they were doing, in a sense, was listening. He said, look at me. I'm a sufferer. This is what's happening. Look at me. He was angry with these friends. And he says that the arrows of God are in him. Now, much of Job's language comes across as harsh. But remember that in essence, the arrows of God to which he refers is also an indication that Job feels he is where he is and is existing as he's existing and suffering where he's suffering because God has his hand in this. He does not say, the arrows of Satan are in me. He doesn't say that. So, yeah, he's angry and he says some rash things. Never denies the Lord and doesn't curse him as Satan said he would. He also refers in these chapters to nature. And he says, nothing in nature cries out unless it's hurt. What do you expect of me? This is a normal procedure. You don't find animals crying out at the feed trough. That's the idea in the referring to nature. This is a very natural thing. The third thing that in this first few chapters there is, he said, my friends have acted deceitfully. And I'm hurt by their unkindness, and I'm unmoved by their arguments. He calls them a dry stream, a wadi in the summertime. with no water. No satisfaction whatsoever in a dry stream bed when you're thirsty. They were not recognizing the need in Job. Your deceitful friends. Now, you're not surprised at this. We've heard this sort of thing before from him. But the word comes up now at the end of that section, in that first speech of his. It's despair. He said in chapter 7, and through most of the chapter, I'll never see good again. After my death, there'll be no return to this familiar thing, to this scene where I've had plenty, where I've had family, where I've been surrounded by friends. I'll not return to that. And he describes once again the horrors of his suffering. That's the end of the first speech. Now really, he does not respond to Eliphaz. He doesn't say, okay, Eliphaz, you said 3 things, and I'm going to refute the 3. But he is calling the friend's attention to the fact that I am a sufferer, and you're not seeing that. Second speech, chapters 9 and 10. 2 themes. 2 themes. No, 1 theme, 2 points. The theme is God, but the 2 points are these. God is great and Job is inadequate. That's the first point. How can a man be right before God? Chapter 9, verse 2. Good question. How can a man be right before God? Now we know the answer to that. But it's because we have the New Testament and we have other verses in the Old Testament too that point to this. But how can a man be right? 9:14. How can I answer him and choose my words? How do I relate to him? 9:33. There's no umpire here for me. There's no mediator. There's no ombudsman. I need that kind of help, he says. God is aloof. He's detached. Now, for us, detached might sound like it means he's not interested. He's not concerned. I think in a sense what Job is referring to, he's so transcendent, he's so far out there. How do I get to him? He said, I need an umpire. And this reflects on his helplessness. And I jotted down on the side of my notes, there is such a thing. This is a real departure from Job. But there is an ombudsman. It's called a redeemer. And it's called a mediator. And in Timothy, Paul writes, there is between God and man one mediator. It's Christ. The very thing Job was longing for, and would know nothing about. We have one who intercedes for us. And we read in John, as we were studying that in 1 John, he ever lives for that in Hebrews. All right. That's the first part of this second speech. The theme is God, but he says God is great, and I'm inadequate. How do I get to him? The second part of that thing in chapter 10, he says, God knows. God knows I'm not guilty, verse 7. God, are you going to destroy what you made? Verse 8. If that's the case, God, then it would have been better had I not been made. Verse 18. Died as an infant. God knows. It's nothing. You could never call Job static. Not static. He isn't, boom. Job is suffering and he's, ooh. And then all of a sudden there's this bright spot in which he focuses on very proper things in his theology. God knows where I am. He has put me where I am. Those arrows are His. Now, Job has facts. He doesn't get them all together all the time. We live like that, unfortunately. It's the way we are. Job was. Third speech. This, by the way, message this morning is called the Handley 500. Third speech. This speech has has some severe criticism. Job is critical of his critics. 12:2. I have understanding as well as you do. I'm not inferior to you. Yeah. Who doesn't know what you're talking about? Who doesn't understand that? You are the people, and I suppose wisdom will die with you. But their supposed wisdom had no effect whatsoever in comforting Job, because the wisdom that they professed was all at one point. You suffer because you're a sinner. Animals are smarter than that, he said. And here's what I know about God. What you know, I know also. I'm no different than you. Now my testimony through all this, says Job, is found in 13:15. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. Well, be careful. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him, but I will maintain my ways before him. That's the King James. This is a statement less, well, maybe better to say it this way. This is a statement that says, I will continue to maintain my innocence, to proclaim the fact that I have not sinned, that no sin has been pointed out to me. I will continue, even though I die in this attempt. Though I die, my testimony is going to be consistent. I am not aware of sin in my life. The friends labored to make him aware. But he said, no. Then he appeals to God at the end of that. Now, what do we learn about Job in this first section? Remember, there is no one verse in the poetry section like those verses in the prologue which says he was perfect and upright and righteous and straight and nothing like that. What you glean from about the character of Job in the poetry section has to be taken from here and here and there and there. That's why synthesis does help. The one outstanding feature in the first series is the word despair. He is in despair, as we see in the passage, because of the severity of his suffering. I hurt. I hurt inside. I hurt on the surface. I hurt. My flesh is clothed with worms. Though that's not in the Revised Version. My skin is hardened. I hurt. There is despair because of the severity of his suffering, because he thinks God's wrath is on him. There's despair because of that. That would set you back. But by the same token, well, let me read you the verses. God is my enemy, Job 7:12-19. And he's giving me a fitful sleep and bad dreams. And I said to him, leave me alone. Then he says in Job 10, well, there's a whole chapter here. It's even darker in its hue. And he says that it was an arbitrary injustice on the part of God. And I don't deserve this. But it is God who is working. It's God who's doing it. It seems arbitrary to me, but it's God who is doing it. And that harkens back to 2:10, where he told his wife, shall we receive the good and not the adversity? Though here it's said in a harsher way. What do we learn about him? There is despair, and it has a spiritual tone to it, and he knows that. He's disappointed in his friends. Disappointed is the gross understatement. But there is despair when he hears the friends speak, And Job answers them in beautiful poetry, but he cuts them down. He says that the kind of help they offered is like a dry stream. Well, that's not helpful. Wisdom will perish with you when you die, right? The friends became a problem beyond the prologue. And the prologue was bad enough. Despair is seen in this section too by his frequent yearning for death. So here we have a man under the gun. That's what you see in the first cycle of Job's speeches. Despair. And we talked about this. We talked about the fact that the answer to despair always is, there's hope. I am intrigued by the fact that even in the Proverbs, there is a reference repeatedly in one section. There's a future. There is a future. 3 times in 2 chapters there. There is a future. There's a hope. And we, of all people, know what that's like. How do you counsel the person in despair? By pointing out their sin again? Or their supposed sin? That won't work. All right. Exasperated beyond measure by his friends, who caused him to say things sacrilegiously. But Job never renounced God. In the first round, who won? Round 1. Who won? Not the friends. And not really a winner in the sense of the common ordinary concept of that in Job. But Job was silencing little by little the arguments of the friend and adjusting his own theology a little bit. Because he was seeing things the friends refused to see. Second round, second cycle. Job now is responding to the fact that Eliphaz has spoken twice and Bildad and Zophar only once in this first speech. He's heard all the friends. He's heard their arguments. Knows that they've changed purposes and they're not there to console him. They're there to point out his sin. And here's his first speech. There are 3 pleas in the first speech, 16 and 17. 3 pleas. 3 beseeches. He pleads to the friends for understanding. Sorry comforters, miserable comforters, he calls them. Will you please try to understand? Have some sympathy. Have some sympathy. But it's easy for the unafflicted, those who aren't feeling this pain, it's easy for them to manufacture theories about why somebody else is hurting. And Job points out, if you could change places with me, were it you who had to scrape, and that's only the physical part, were it you that had to deal with family that was gone, were it you that had, things would be different. And I would counsel you. Sorry, he calls them 3 names. Name calling. 3 names. Sorry comforters, or miserable comforters. Deceitful, dried up creek, wadi. Deceitful because I expect water and it's not there. And he calls them worthless physicians in 13:4. I'm not going to touch on that one. But they were doctors who didn't doc. They did not contribute to his getting well. There's a second plea. I need justice from God. Now, he has repeatedly asked for a court appearance before God. So that God would vindicate him, actually. So that God would demonstrate that this man standing before him was not as the friends described him. He wanted a court appearance. So he pleads for justice before God, lamenting again that he had no lawyer, no advocate. We've talked about our advocate. We can't read New Testament truth back into this, but we can understand the fact that fallen man, and Job was part of that, and so would the friends, fallen men need an advocate. They need a mediator. They need a redeemer. Now, Job is responding in that same thing. My only hope is in God, and I've got to stand for Him. He has a plea for death in this same section, in the same speech. He considers himself a dying man in any event. I'm dying, and I just as soon go through with it. That's the idea. And he said, all the prosperity that you tell me about if I repent, and I have no need to repent, but all this prosperity that you hang out as a carrot for me is of no use to me. I'm dying. And he pleads that this will go on, and he will die. That's the end of that first speech in the second cycle. In the second speech, Job 19, he's responding immediately to Bildad. And Bildad has just finished describing the terrors of death. And Job follows with what he might term the terrors of my life, the trials of my life. Trials because of hostile accusers, trials because of admitted arrows of God afflicting me, trials because of my relatives and my friends. By the way, don't you wonder what happened to the relatives? At the beginning of the book, and through all of this part, don't you wonder where the relatives were? The people who were supposed to have cared because they were, quote, family. In the end of the book, you hear something about them. But they abandoned Job completely during this terrible suffering time. And then there's a beautiful section in this speech in 19:33 to 27, and he comes up from the depths of this despair to renewed confidence in the Lord, and there's a bright spot. 19:23 through 27. Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were printed in a book, and they were. Oh, that they were graven upon with an iron pen and laid to the rock, and lead in the rock forever. Oh, for I know that my Redeemer lives, and that He shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. Now, let me stop there. Redeemer here is the Old Testament concept of the kinsman redeemer, like the story in Ruth, the kinsman redeemer. But this is a bright spot. Somebody wrote, in spite of, I think it was Wiersbe, in spite of what preachers say, remember that. In spite of what preachers say, very few sufferers experience consistent joy. Precious few people can maintain a consistent, high level of faith and courage in time of pain. I don't know whether that's encouraging or discouraging to you, but it is true. You remember Fanny Crosby in that situation. This man who treated her eyes with something and blinded her. When the sad misfortune became known throughout our neighborhood, she wrote, the unfortunate man thought it best to leave, and we never heard from him again. But I have not for a moment in more than 85 years felt a spark of resentment against him, because I've always felt and believed from my youth that this very moment, and to this very moment, that the good Lord, in His infinite mercy, by this means consecrated me to the work I'm permitted to do. And this is what she wrote. Oh, what a happy soul I am, although I cannot see, I am resolved that in this world contented I will be. How many blessings I enjoy that other people don't? To weep and sigh because I'm blind, I cannot, and I won't. Fanny Crosby was one of those few who consistently, for all of those 80-some years, live with the suffering, live with the pain, live with the blindness. But as Wearsey pointed out, very few people do have a consistent approach to this. And they're more like Job, who is deep into the depression of the actual suffering, and then all of a sudden rises up. And that's what happens here in this one verse. At the end of that chapter, he talks to the friends again. And he said, friends, watch out. You will stand before God. Now, the third speech. And here he points to, this is the third speech in this cycle. He points out in chapter 21, in what is a shuddering description, what he sees in the world. Bold contrast to what the friends have said. The wicked live prosperously, and they seem to die securely. So friends, listen to this. What he said in 21, 1 to 6. And then in 23, he said, some wicked live prosperously, die peacefully, but that didn't mean that Job wanted any part of their philosophy. And here's what I think about your counsel, 21:34. No confidence whatsoever in what you've said. So what do we learn about Job in these series of arguments? There's an increased disdain for the friends. He sees them spiraling down in their arguments. And as the logic and importance, truthful importance of their argument begins to diminish, their anger and their intensity increases. And so Job says, I am disdainful of you as friends. Unfair treatment I'm receiving from you. And then he says the brighter relationship with my God is shown in two very luminous sections of this speech. My witness in heaven and my advocate is on high, 16:19. Men may mock me and cause me to shed bitter tears, but God knows the record. Oh, that man might plead with God as a man with his neighbor. And it's the idea of an intercessor that he needs. This was not the case of a man who had denied God, or a man who was feeling, hey, there is no help for me in God. This is a man who recognized there was help, but I need an intercessor. I need the advocate. I need the lawyer. And there is a future. Let me tell you something else about this. It was not that the friends were liberals or that the friends were atheists. Remember that. And that Job is a conservative and Job is a theist. No. These four had similar approach in doctrine and theology to what life was. The three friends emphasized only one point of that. And Job was beginning to see, no, it isn't that way. It isn't that way. I'm adjusting this. And all of these things come out in these arguments. We do not have time to face the final argument in the final cycle. We'll do that. But I want to say this. We are approaching in this last argument and then the final speech that Job gives, we are approaching to what is probably the real reason for this whole debate. Approaching it. We don't really get to more definitive ideas about it until the last couple of chapters, but we're approaching it. Because Job is beginning to win this argument. Job is beginning to sense that his self-vindication is paying off, and the friends are sinking into that. They're becoming angrier, but they're not making a contribution. And this points to the specific problem Job is going to have to face. I'm winning. And whereas health, now first of all, wealth and health were treated at the beginning of the prologue, now we're going to begin to see that self has to be treated. He has vindicated himself, and he's beginning to feel pretty cocky about that. He's demanded something of God, and he wants to be vindicated before God. And all of a sudden there is rearing its head a self-righteousness which God is going to have to deal with. We're going to see it in the final speeches of Job and his friends. Despair, disdain for the friends, suffering. What do you do for them? You offer them hope. The friends didn't do that. May the God of hope fill you with all joy, peace, because you have a Redeemer, you have an Advocate, you have an Intercessor. You have a God who does know, is concerned. There's hope. There is a future. Thank God for that. We do not need to live in this morass of poorly applied theology mixed with suffering and pain. There's hope. This is a good book. Tedious in this part. And I apologize for that. And by the way, I don't find anything for Mother's Day in Job. So we will not be looking at Job next week. But I thank God for what He's put in this book. Help us to learn from it, Father. I thank You for this thing. Guide us, direct us. And help us to understand that these pressures, the pain and the pressure that's in this book, is meant to bring something to Job's attention. Help to bring it to our attention through the ministry of the Spirit of God, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen.